what does it actually look like on the ground there? Are Russians just attacking military compounds and airports, or are they attacking civilians too?
They're attacking everything right now. The reality is they weren't successful in trying to sweep the country fast, which they aim to do. And that's why essentially they are involved in all-out fighting on all different lines.
In the Western media, it says that Russia's been attacking Ukrainian civilians. Is that true?
Абсолютная ложь.
It's absolutely lie. We are supporting the civilians in Ukraine. We are giving food to those people. We are entering into the territory the tons of products because in the cities who are now more relaxed, like Melitopol, for example, we have seen the footages when the soldiers are giving food to our brothers, because these are our brothers.
Hey there, I'm Mikhaila Peterson. This is my podcast. I regularly do episodes called Opposing Views, where I get two people on to share their views on contentious subjects. I don't want to downplay how serious the invasion of Ukraine by Russia is by calling this an Opposing Views episode. I'm not taking this lightly. I had the opportunity to interview two people. One, Nikolai Burlyayev. Nikolai is part of the Russian government, and Sviatoslav Yurash. He is a Ukrainian politician. He's the youngest Ukrainian member of parliament. He has a crazy story. He was previously the Euromaidan press center organizer and senior spokesperson for Zelensky's 2019 presidential election campaign. He's currently in Kyiv and has taken up arms against the Russian military. I asked him similar questions to Nikolai, and he also went into details about what it actually looks like in Ukraine on the ground. Nikolai is part of the Russian government, part of the State Duma, which is like the elected parliament, first deputy chairman of the Committee for the Development of Civil Society, Public and Religious Association Issues, and member of the Orthodox Patriarchal Council for Culture. He was also an actor for most of his life, something that isn't viewed like Hollywood is viewed in the West. It's a prestigious job, particularly during the Soviet Union. He came on to discuss the Russian government's perspective of what's happening. It was done through an instantaneous translator, so it might be a bit choppy. I'm not interested in contributing to censorship. Shutting RT, Russia Today, down, the Russian government's news source, like some platforms have, I think is a mistake. Russia blocking Facebook and Twitter from their citizens, something I would have asked Nikolai about, except it happened after we spoke, is a mistake. We can't understand the motivations behind actions without clear communication. We don't know what's true without looking at all perspectives. And the more lines of communications are kept open, the more likely there's peace, I think, for whatever that's worth. I've linked what Yurash spoke about in the show notes. If you're interested in donating, there's a bank account listed there. Welcome to my podcast.
Thank you very much. Your interest and the fact that you care means a great deal. I'm a big fan.
Good. Okay. Well, I'm really excited to talk about what you've been doing because things are insane right now. So before we get started, can you give a brief background about who you are and what you do?
So I come from the west of Ukraine. After finishing the school there, I went to study in Poland, then I went to study to India. And that's when the revolution in my country started in 2014. So I came back to my country for the revolution. During the revolution, I started and headed the international center of the Maidan, with foreigners, internationals, media, diaspora, and embassies. We had a social media. We started to transmit all about the events during the revolution to the world in various languages. I got a medal for that. Then I went to the war in 2014. I was a journalist there, basically seeing how a beautiful city like Donetsk was turned into hell through the Russian incursion and transformation of that wonderful, rich region. And then I went to Kyiv, where I did many things, which led me to not support the president incumbent and support his competitor, who's now the president of Ukraine. And after the elections, I was invited to join in as a member of parliament. I did, and I became the youngest ever member of parliament of Ukraine.
Okay, that was quite an intro. That was great. Okay, I've got a couple of questions about what you said. So you said you came back for the revolution and the war in 2014. So for anybody listening who might not be aware that there was a revolution and war, can you describe what that was?
I'm sorry, Mikhaila, I'm just not used to hour-long podcasts. They are wonderful to me, but as far as the reality of my presentations, usually I have to brief and get my
I like brief. Brief is perfect.
That's why I didn't expand. So basically, I thought my youthful adventure that your father speaks about will be basically somewhere in India. And that's why I went to essentially, because Poland was quite Ukraine done right, if I can describe it briefly, in terms of reform and change and economic progress and all that. And after that point, you desire something that is wholly different from what you came from. And that's why I went to India. But at that point, our president, who was the president at that point, chose to renege on his promises of the European Union path. And that's when the students came up on the streets to try and protest that action. I was not sure about coming back to that point, but then he beat them up, and that caused a huge uproar, and millions of people were coming out the streets and essentially sweeping central Kyiv, our capital, from all the police forces there, and started a huge camp called the Maidan, which became sort of a center point for the events that unfolded in the next 2 months, when the president essentially fled the country as the result of protests, and new elections was held, and Russia decided to react by annexing Crimea and starting a war in eastern Ukraine. So that's, again, long story short.
Okay. And then what's been going on in Donetsk?
In Donetsk, basically, the reality was in 2014. This was a city where it was a rich city in Ukraine by many measurements, because a good deal of our elites come from Donetsk, and they've been essentially investing heavily in that town. And when I arrived there in April 2014, I wasn't really expecting, and nobody was expecting it to become what it did become. That is, with the Russian auxiliaries and Russians moving in and trying to set up these puppet republics, turning that city into hell of marauders and basically dissolution of every structural state in Donetsk. And basically, when I arrived in April 2014, I was just coming from the Maidan, and the revolution that those Russian proxies hated with a passion. And the reason why it wasn't captured, because I was working with foreigners. So they basically did not know me. So it's the internationals that knew me, and not the Ukrainian crowd. So the fact of the matter is, because of the events in 2014 and the revolution, I got a chance to then travel to Donetsk and had to invent my new identity to survive there from April to August 2014. So I pretended to be a Polish producer. I worked with Fox News for the entire time. And because of my very bad Russian, as I come from Western Ukraine, I'm the first generation that did not study Russian in school. So my Russian is bearable, but it's clearly not Ukrainian Russian, basically. And that's how I survived there. And after MH17, the Malaysian plane that was shot down over eastern Ukraine by the Russian missile systems, basically that's the point where I would stay 2 weeks or 3 weeks after that point, and I then left Donetsk, going to Kyiv and doing many things, many institutions, for many reasons, in many capacities, trying to be sort of a dilettante, man of many professions, but basically trading in two things. First, information, and second, trying to connect good people with good initiatives and getting many things going off the ground. And basically, at that point, I had a chance to see the reality of what the president then represented, and I thought that I could not support that. So that's why when Mr. Zelensky announced that he was running for the presidency, I joined him a month after he announced, and that's my political career starting out.
Do you think any of the war going on now is a discrepancy between what older people who lived in the Soviet Union want and what younger people want? Or do you think most Ukrainians want the same thing?
I mean, you can look at the polls and measurements. They clearly point that there is certainly much skepticism about European direction. But after 2014, after annexation and after the war with Russia in the East, as far as the polling is concerned, it's not exactly split in the middle. The reality is a majority wants to go to the West. And then the other big side is people don't know. Clear minority basically is in support of any Russian moves. But again, after the events that are happening right now, that minority is shrinking to nothing. The point is Putin has done everything possible to try and destroy any pro-Russian discourse in Ukrainian politics. When I debate pro-Russian politicians in various different media channels in Ukraine, they shudder even to try and say that they are pro-Russian. They must insist like points like neutral and all that, because to say that you're pro-Russian in Ukraine right now is an impossibility. Before the revolution, it was quite easy to say that you are pro-Russian and to say that you basically are for the alignment of our country with Russia. But after these events and after response to them by Mr. Putin, he destroyed any goodwill there was for Russia in Ukrainian society.
Okay. Question number 2. What does it actually look like on the ground there? Are Russians just attacking military compounds and airports, or are they attacking civilians too?
They're attacking everything right now. The reality is they weren't successful in trying to sweep the country fast, which they aim to do. And that's why essentially they are involved in all-out fighting on all the front lines. In Ukraine and Russia, it's very important to describe the scales here. So Ukraine is the biggest country in Europe proper, and Russia is the biggest country in the world. So the point is we share more than 1,000-kilometer border with Russia, and we share about 500 kilometers of border with their puppet Belarus to our north. They have attacked on each and every front line, and including attempts to try and seize the south of Ukraine by landing some Marines there. So we essentially are fighting on every single front line, every single direction against the Russian forces, which are using everything in their power to try and overwhelm us. And still they are not able to.
Okay.
But I didn't answer your question. I'm sorry. What is on the ground? The reality is it's a country that is changing extremely fast in the last 10 days from a country which was same as any European country traveled to. So nice, people drinking your decaf latte with soy milk somewhere in a nice coffee shop for $5, with people on driving on the Teslas, and this was a wealthy European town, Kyiv, that is, and life here was as with every European capital, basically, and it's now it's mostly abandoned as far as the activity of citizens, but as far as people joining up and getting to recruitment stations, it's full up, and cities building barricades, building tank traps, getting everything ready for a full Russian invasion. And as I speak to you, basically, I just heard that the Russian tank column, 40 kilometers long, which is staying north of Kyiv, has started to move on to Kyiv. So who knows when I will be talking and in what capacity a few hours from now.
Oh my gosh, this is so awful. I'm so sorry for, whatever that's worth. This is awful. Okay.
I mean, it's a very important lesson that you can learn here, to see a city like any other turned in no time into a hellscape. The reality is it's just, people don't know how small it is, the barrier between normality and madness. And you see how it happens here. But the reality is not madness we are facing. It's the unique example of unity, because with Putin advancing and trying to take Ukraine, which he has consistently tried to do for the last 20 years of his power, Ukraine is as united as ever. So people are doing everything in their power to try and beat back the attacks we have on our capital and everywhere else.
Okay, we covered a bunch of questions I want to ask at the beginning. Why do some Russians believe Ukraine is actually Russia? Why is that part of the rhetoric that's going on? Why do you think? Well,
it's quite simple. The Russian textbook on history starts with our capital. It starts here in Kyiv. I mean, there's a battle of myths happening here. So the Russian myth essentially is that there was a big state centered on Kyiv, Kievan Rus, which was essentially a big state, powerful European state, which was smashed by the Mongols, Mongol invasion. And a chunk of it survived in the north around Moscow. And that chunk got stronger and stronger and stronger. And after a while, beat back the Mongols, conquered all the old lands back and even conquered some more. And that's basically the reality of that unity of all nations. But we are saying, Ukrainians, we never left. We never went anywhere. So we were still here the whole time. And we had a joint state with Poles, with Lithuanians, with other nations around us. And the reality is that we basically, in that time, where the thesis of old Kievan Rus state essentially was separated by the Mongol invasion, have developed a whole new and very clear and identity, which you can see right now with Ukrainians trying to fight back against the second biggest army in the world. And the reality is that there's a saying, the Russian liberal ends where the question of Ukraine begins, which basically means that Russians have this tendency of seeing our nation as part of their nation for many reasons. But it's, you Canadians can relate to this. It's as if, America would say that Canada is America, basically, because it speaks English, comes from the same empire, and therefore should be a part of America. It's the same idea of itself, but Canadians see it differently. And the same story goes for Ukrainians, even though there are characteristics which are of similar nature. Basically, that separate identity has forged, especially in these battles of the last 8 years on the Eastern Front line, and now every single day it's getting stronger and stronger.
Okay, that makes sense. Why is Putin saying there are Nazis in the Ukraine?
Well, it's the reality of what that man is. I mean, that man grew up in the time after the Second World War, when he basically got the Soviet propaganda, and which was about that everybody's a Nazi. And Soviet propaganda tried to point out that the West basically is Nazi-friendly, or taking up Nazis, or playing with them in terms of integrating them in societies and into power structures, and basically trying to say that they are Nazi-esque in one way or the other. So as far as Putin is concerned, he's trying to use the old Soviet tropes, Soviet technologies, Soviet ideas about the world, try and force his imperialism onto Ukraine. But Mr. Putin has been, as people are saying that Putin is mad, Putin is this and that, Putin is very consistent about one thing, that is the fact that he sees Ukrainians and Russians as the same people. And in his rhetoric over the last 8 years, he's been trying to bring that around with various instruments. But now, seeing that electorally he has no future in Ukraine, none of his parties, none of his proxies really are gaining traction or attention or support, he basically has turned to one instrument that he thinks history will redeem him from, that is violence and invasion. But history has an opposite opinion of despots who try and invade countries, as you might remember from basic history lessons that you might have.
Okay. What role does NATO play, if any, in causing Russia to attack?
Well, Russia explains the story with NATO expansion as if it's against Russia. The reality is NATO expansion actually is about those countries in Central Europe which faced Russian aggression firsthand, turning somewhere for that security which they didn't have when they experienced the Prague Spring, when they experienced the Hungarian Revolution in the Soviet times, Soviet invasion. For that, the Soviets did everything possible for these countries not to feel safe on their own with Russia in the neighborhood. So, of course, they tried to join that alliance, which proposed and offered security against the possibility of Russian invasion. And we see that it does work because, for example, Estonia small country in the Baltic region. It's basically has right on the border of Russia, a huge region which is full of Russians, like 93% Russian, actually. And there is no People's Republic there. There is no Russian forces. There are no Russian forces moving into the area. It's very simple. Estonia is in NATO, so it's impossible to try and do that without the repercussions that Russia actually fears. So the point is that Russia sees NATO expansion basically as a step against their ability to control the region that it sees as its own region, while these countries have different ideas, choosing their own future and choosing their future exactly because of Russian aggression away from Russia, and choosing a future with the West, which is more prosperous, more successful, and more secure than what Russia is offering.
So the person I talked to who was from the Russian government, his view, it sounded like, and I could be completely misunderstanding this, but it sounded like they were potentially scared that NATO was going to take over Russia, that the end goal of NATO was to actually consume Russia. Do you think that's just rhetoric, or do you think that there's an actual fear that NATO is going into Russia?
I'm sure it's actually fear. It's fear that those Western institutions promote democracy, real democracy, which promote transparency, and to want your politicians not to have huge Swiss bank accounts with billions on them and not steal money from your people, that those systems will actually hold and try to run as a desire for your nation. I mean, there's a huge fear of those institutions in the West, which are as imperfect as they are. They are trying to lead and bend the democratic will to try and destroy that possibility of your country's leaders becoming those kleptocrats and dictators who essentially are hoarding money from your nation into their own private ambition, this and that sort. Of course, Russia is afraid of the opposition to the reality of its regime. That's why, for example, all the leaders, leaders in Russia aren't so much focusing on NATO or Ukraine. They're focusing on corruption. They are pointing this time and time again, the corrupt nature of Russian government. And they're absolutely right that all these stories about NATO and the West and this and that and the other is all excuses for Russia trying to keep the system it has, which essentially enriches a few while destroying lives of many. But I think Mr. Putin is beyond that. I mean, Mr. Putin, it's the reality of being powerful all this time, doesn't really think about elections or so opinion polls. He thinks about historical legacy, and historical legacy that he wants for himself, as he said himself many times, is the uniter of the Russian peoples, as he says it. So somebody who will bring into the fold Ukraine, Belarus, and try and showcase that even though the Soviet Union is no more, that he can do this. He can provide an image of a country which essentially can still come back to his historical claims. The reality is that for Ukrainians, when they travel to Poland, when they see a first village out of the border, of the border, they see that people live better there. You don't need economic graphs or big analysis to see that. They just look at the reality of people living there and they see this as a fact. When they go to Russia, they don't see that. They don't see what is that to aspire to as far as civilization model. They don't see economic progress. They see a state in which there is no possibility to protest, no possibility to voice your position of in anything. And basically they see a state which is essentially coming back to what we left in the Soviet Union, trying to essentially reestablish those systems that despise liberty, not just crack down on, but despise it, and essentially destroy every single vestige of free society that is in Russia. I mean, this week, actually, my favorite radio station in Russia was closed down. Radio station listened to for 15 years. The radio station which I adore, basically. For every single week, I listen to podcasts from that radio station. It was a ritual of mine, in a sense. And that radio station, that curious story, why it remained all that time in Russia, but it's dead now. And that's all the result of Putin's policies in Russia. That not even a voice of opposition can be allowed, not even a voice of dissent can be provided for. That's not something to aspire to. We are freedom-loving peoples, have always been. That's why the story of ours always went to Cossacks, people who left serfdom in the Polish state, went to the steps in the south of Ukraine and try to establish their free communes of people that would essentially be defending against the Tatar raids coming to Ukraine to sort of get slaves for the Ottoman slave markets. And essentially the point here is that freedom is essentially one strain that goes throughout our history. And the Russian state has the opposite objective. And that's why Ukrainians are not fans of that integration, shall I be diplomatic.
Yes, I can see that. Do you think for Russia this is going to end in another Iron Curtain? I know that yesterday they shut off Facebook, I think something else as well.
And Twitter and Instagram.
Yeah.
They're shutting off everything because we have basically the war in Ukraine providing for a lot of imagery. A lot of it. And that imagery is from the hundreds of, if not thousands now, of captured POWs who were explaining their story. For example, the call of our Minister of Defense for Russian mothers to come to Ukraine and pick up their captured sons. I mean, we invited, if you want to retake your captured son, you just come to Ukraine, we'll give him to you. They don't want Russians to know that. They don't want Russians to hear of dissent in different parts of Russia. Basically to shut off the idea that in Russia there's any other opinion about Mr. Putin's opinion. The reality is everything has gotten worse for anybody who loves freedom in Russia and wants to aspire to it. And believe me, over the years, just a day before the invasion, I was speaking with former head of the office of Mr. Navalny, who's the main opposition figure in Russia, in St. Petersburg, exactly about this problem. So the fact that Russians see Ukrainians as that, and Ukrainians see Russians as this, but this dialogue between them is not maintained and should be rekindled and rebuilt. And unfortunately, a day after that, we have an invasion. So the reality is that Putin is destroying any image of that, and he's trying to force his image of history and the future onto Ukraine through war, the war that everybody sees but his own nation.
Wow. Okay. Why? Well, is this true? And if so, why? Why was the Russian language banned in Ukraine? Is that true?
It was not banned. There was never a ban on Russian language in Ukraine. The fact of the matter is, actually, our constitution provides for the free use of Russian language. Basically, spells it out that national language is Ukrainian, but as far as the use of regional languages and Russian should be allowed for in every single way. That was what you refer to. I imagine the point that many Russian propagandists point to is that during the time of this president, who essentially fled the country after the revolution of 2014, Maya Revolution, basically they adopted this regional language law, providing for different regions of Ukraine to be able to have regional languages as well as the national language. And after the revolution, there was basically an attempt by one of the three opposition parties to repeal this law. It was passed in the parliament, but then it was not signed by the president, acting president. So it was not even brought down by that. There was no vote even to repeal this regional languages law. Regional languages law just simply means that you could, for example, go to government institutions and use Russian as well as Ukrainian. That's that. And as far as the language discussion in Ukraine, I mean, the point is this discussion is no more. The reality is that this war unites everybody. And believe me, my opinion, language issue in Ukraine in general has shifted a great deal, because at the revolution and during the war in the East, I saw many people who have done everything imaginable to support and live for Ukraine, and who died for Ukraine, and they spoke Russian and all that process. And as far as my position language issue, I'm a true believer that Ukrainians come in all stripes and forms. Ukrainians are Russian-speaking, Ukrainian-speaking, it doesn't really make a difference in that regard. Speaking Russian doesn't make you Russian. Speaking Russian is one of the one of the official languages of the UN. So as far as the fact that some Ukrainians speak Russian, sure, but ask them who they identify as. And like the same would go in Canada here. And speaking French doesn't necessarily make you French. That assumption is faulty. It's the same as speaking English in Canada doesn't make you English. You can be Canadian as well. So to assume here that everybody who speaks Russian in Ukraine is Russian, or that you could ban a language which at least half the population speak every day, is madness. I was married for a long time to a lady who spoke Russian. I spoke Ukrainian, and basically, it wasn't an issue at all.
Okay, good answer.
I don't actually in Canada. I'm sorry, Canada, because in Ukraine the reality is somebody can speak Russian. I can speak Ukrainian with them. We understand each other perfectly. That's how we communicate.
Yeah.
I don't know whether it's English or French that way in Canada.
Yeah, no. No, but I get what you mean though. Like people from Quebec are not French. They're just Canadian, kind of. I don't know if they identify as Canadian exactly, but I get what you mean. Canadian. Yeah, Quebecois, exactly. Okay, do you think is this true? And if so, do you think it's reasonable that men currently can't leave Ukraine?
That is mobilization happening in Ukraine. And mobilization means that every able-bodied man, 18 to 60, is dropped into the army because, again, our nation is facing an attack on all of our 1,000-mile border with Russia, facing incursions and actually Russian invasion from Belarusian border, which is 500 miles long, and facing not infrequent marine invasion from the south of Ukraine. So the point is everybody is needed as much as possible. And actually I'm trying to help organize some of the foreigners and some of the diaspora people who want to join, Ukrainians by descent who want to join the fight. Because in this fight, in this onslaught, everybody's needed, like they were never needed before.
Is what the media portraying in the West true? Because we've had so much misinformation with COVID that a lot of people have lost faith in anything the mainstream media is reporting. So from what you've seen from mainstream media, is that an accurate portrayal of what's happening?
Well, we have cruise missiles fired on Ukrainian cities. We have children dead, women dead. We have fighting all across the border. We have residential buildings destroyed. They're fighting about 20 kilometers from where I sit right now. I was coming to those towns both to fight and to try and provide humanitarian things which I can gather. And the reality is that in all of this, the fact of the matter is we are facing an onslaught by the second biggest army in the world trying to destroy a nation, can consume it whole. And if allowed, Russia destroying largest nation in Europe would essentially mean the whole destruction of the international system of law and order. These things should not happen in this century, as they told me when I was growing up, but they are happening and we're trying to resist. Because again, for people like myself, when they think about their family history, my great-grandfather went to Stalingrad and he went on to liberate Europe. My great-grandmother has lived through Holodomor, genocide by hunger of the Ukrainian people. So the fact of the matter is, if they survive this, and this horrible 20th century for my nation, and in the end of that century we got to live in an independent state, then who if not us should try and preserve that gift that they gifted us and try and further it and build it up into the future.
So what do you think's going to happen here? What's your guess?
Well, it depends on Russia. So if Russia tries to mobilize, if Russia tries to throw in more resources, we will have a long, drawn-out battle, which will cost dearly. But again, we are here fighting for our country, for our nation, for our land, for our future. And we are not going to back down. We are very clear that we want to be an independent nation, signing its own story. And so we will fight. No matter what Russia throws at us, we will fight.
What do you think the world's response should be to this?
Well, first, Russia has broken every single rule in the international guidebook. So it's not just here now, but throughout the 20 years of Putin's presidency. Russia has basically destroyed every single idea about what international law should be. all around the world, be that in Venezuela, be that Central African Republic, or be that in Ukraine. So the point here is that Russia needs to be thrown out of every single institution that it's part of, because it doesn't deserve with current leadership to have any play in the national institutions. It doesn't respect it. It tries to destroy, manipulate, and essentially use its own imperialistic ambitions in the region. But the reality at hand is that that's only the first part. The second part is, as far as the fight happening in Ukraine, nothing is enough. We are in need of everything and anything in this fight. I mean, I spent a good chunk of my day trying to bring different supplies to different parts of the front line, and basically we welcome all the help we are getting from the West, but we need so much more to try and have a chance against one of the biggest armies in the world, second biggest if you believe numbers.
Okay. Do you know, like, if people listening want to help somehow, do you know ways they can do that? I'm sure there are going to be comments about that.
Yes, and there's actually an official bank account that our National Bank of Ukraine started to try and allow anybody who wants to donate to us have a direct pathway to it. And also there's all these humanitarian organizations who are springing into action. Almost all of them have tried to reach out to support our fight in different ways, support the humanitarian needs that millions of Ukrainian refugees now crossing the borders into Poland or Romania have, or just staying in the Western Ukraine have. So the point here is that all of that is very much available, and I cannot give you off the top of my head the exact numbers the bank account the Ukrainian government has started, for example. But much of it was shared on social media. I'm basically seeing lots of links sent to all of that.
Okay, well, we ran through the questions I have. I can't thank you enough for coming on and talking about what's going on there. Is there anything else you'd like to say? I think that this episode will probably there's a war, so people are going to watch it. So is there anything else you want people to know about that we haven't covered?
Our nation is fighting for its freedom, for its chance to choose its future. We have very similar problems to all of you. We have politicians we don't like. We have politicians who fail. We have politicians who have hope that they represent. And we were in this paradigm for the longest time. And Russia is trying to destroy all of that and take our freedom away from us, just trying to build a puppet state of various kinds. We will fight until the last, not let it happen. And the point for us is that I sincerely thank everyone who is sending everything, starting with prayers and words, because we are a God-fearing nation. So for us, those prayers mean a lot, but also the question of all the support that you find on various social media channels that send all the understanding about possible help to Ukrainian army and Ukrainian humanitarian efforts. Everything is very welcome. And again, this understanding that the world is watching and the world is behind us makes us more certain in our defiance to try and stand up for our freedom. And again, it's just in a long line of people who are fighting for that throughout the centuries. So we will continue to fight, no matter what comes our way.
Well, I hope I hope things get better. If people want to follow you or learn more, where should they go?
I'm on Twitter. I'm on Instagram. My name is very long and very Slavic, and I apologize for my parents who named me, not thinking about national audience who might have a problem spelling that name. When I was in India, they tried to shorten by saying not Sviatoslav but Sweet Love, and I. As sort of my Instagram is basically S_YURASH. So Yurash is my surname, and my Twitter is my name UA. So that's long and Slavic. I apologize. Sviatoslav SVIATOS. Yeah, that's the easier way, because trying to have a spelling bee here with Ukrainian names is not easy for anybody. So thank you very much for your interest. And I must say, Mikhaila, I don't know whether this latest debate of yours in Oxford between vegans and meat eaters has been published, but I was right before the war. I was trying to find it and couldn't find it still.
It's up now. It's not as dramatic as what you're going through, but it's pretty funny if you need something to laugh at. It's on my channel.
Your father was speaking about this in his podcast, and I was sort of trying to find it as well. So, and I haven't read the 12 More Rules for Life. I just bought it, and basically the war is taking that chance away from you. But I have deep respect for you and your father and the work you're doing to bring this wave of enlightenment to many people who are trying to find meaning in their life, and which is far more precious than anything. And as I say, the war basically brings you that meaning as nothing else, because it gives you understanding what your nation is all about. When you see all these people lining up and trying to battle and fight and die for their country, you see that your nation is real, and that aspiration that you have is even more so.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for coming on. Good luck. Good luck over there. It's
Thank you very much, Mikhaila.
So good luck. I'll send prayers.
Thank you, Mikhaila.
Nikolai, welcome to my podcast.
Thank you.
Before we get started, could you give me a brief background about who you are and what it is you do?
In my profession, I am actor, and I work in movie industry. I was filmed in 70 movies, and some of these movies became the best movies of all the times of the nations, like Andrei Tarkovsky, Andrei Rublev, and The Childhood of Ivan, Ivanovo Детство in Russian. And I also were delivering my own movies, and as Andrei Tarkovsky told, every movie should be a statement. And I have 2 full-length movies and 4 short movies and 3 documentaries. And also this year I became the deputy of Russian State Duma. I am the professor of 2 or 3 academies, and St. Petersburg Academy of Movie Making and Theater and Television Academy, Serbian Academy of Arts. And I am member at the Patriarch Council for Culture at the Russian Orthodox Church. And there are many other things that I'm doing, basically.
Okay, great. Well, thank you again for coming to join me to talk about what we're going to talk about. Okay, question number 1. I think it would be good to give the listeners in the West a background of the history between Russia and the Ukraine. So could you give me a brief history about Russia and the Ukraine in the last 15 years?
Да, конечно, с удовольствием.
Yes, of course. Let us start with this. Ukraine is my fatherland. That means the father of my father was a colonel at Zaporozhye, and his name was Kondrat Burlyayev. And at that time, there was the Hetman Bogdan Khmelnytsky who sent him with the plea to join, to make a join between Ukraine and Russia. And I am the direct descent of this particular Cossack who went to Russia and asked Ukraine to be a part of the Russia. And we have a long history between us and Ukraine. How not to love Ukraine? We love Ukraine so much. We love the people, we love the songs, and we know that these people are every time joining us at one and the same table. And during the 30 years, Ukraine was ill, and I've seen this disease and the development of this disease. I came to Ukraine in 1992 when it was detached from Russia. And this was not a natural breach between the countries. And this was made in a synthetic way, and this was made by 3 Judas of Slavic world, so to say. Yeltsin in Russia, Kravchuk, Belarusia, I beg your pardon, Kravchuk, Ukraine, the president of Ukraine, and Shushkevich, the head of Republic of Belarus. And they had a meeting at the Dark Forest. I think that they took a bottle of vodka and then they assigned a huge country to die. And this country, this huge country, was built by my far relatives, and they were harmonizing during the centuries Russia, and these three people could make the thing that could not be made by Tatar-Mongolian yoke. It was not done by Napoleon, invasion of Russia, by Hitler also. Nobody could divide Russia, but these three people could do this. They decapitated our country, they made one folk and they took one folk and divided this into three. Russians, Ukrainians, Belarusians are one and the same nation. I have people whose blood is streaming in me from Russia, from Ukraine, from Belarus, and everything is mixed up here. And I've seen it when I've started to make rounds and rounds around the countries in 1992. I was searching for the movies for Movie Forum in Moscow, and I was working together with the Ministry of Culture of Ukraine, and I was sitting in a hall, and by the way, I have the big set of friends in Kyiv, and there are also famous people from culture, and they brought movies. And what did I see already in 1992? I've seen it that before in the Soviet movies, the main evil guys were the SS people, the fascists, the Nazis who were burning some Ukrainian settlements, who were terrorizing Ukrainians who were doing massacre. But I've seen that in the Ukrainian movies in 1992, the biggest bad guys became the Russians, the officers of NKVD, Russian Special Forces at the Soviet times, who were making horrible things and who were... And by the way, I was contacting in Kyiv my friends through television, and I was asking them, what are you doing? You are serving for the fascists, for these 30 silver coins. And by the way, the process was started at that time. And in these 30 years, my friends in Ukraine, artists, the people's artists, the famous artists who were famous already at the Soviet time, they started to support this Russophobia, the hate towards Russians, against Russians. They've started to speak anti-historical things like we are different people, Russians and Ukrainians, and this is crazy. How can you take me and cut me into pieces where I am Ukrainian, what piece of me is Russian? And they made this new generation of Russophobes, and they introduced into their understanding this notion that Russians are the bad guys, Russians are the fines. And by the way, I've understood that without this serious operation, without cutting out, without the deletion of this fascism and nationalism in Ukraine, you cannot heal this country. And now, by the way, today I've used the platform of our Russian parliament, and I was connecting by the television to our Ukrainian brothers, and I told them, we were 25 years at the side of each other. You were visiting me on my movie forum, the Zolotoy Vitis, the Golden Knight, and I was bringing all the Ukrainians and into one group, and they were seeing what are the 19 countries of the world making in what were the atrocities, and they had seen the atrocities. They have seen what happened in Russia in 1993, for example, when Yeltsin put the order to use the tanks against the White House, against the Russian parliament. And they have seen that at that time, in 1993, in Moscow, the third power was working. There were some special points, just very convenient ones, and I will not speak about the particular places, but there were some points from which the people were shooting at plain people, because those people needed blood. Those people needed the war of everybody against everybody, the national war. And this was done by our foreign colleagues, by the way. And the same started in Ukraine. And there is every time the same scenario in all different countries, in Serbia, in Russia, in Ukraine, in Lithuania, in Tbilisi, Georgia, in Syria, in Libya. And the scenario is pretty much the same, to push everybody against everybody, to come to the civil war and to introduce the blood in all the atrocities. And they are then later on bringing the democracy. And by the way, there is no democracy. No democracy in America, no democracy in Russia, no democracy in France. It's just very convenient. And this is what happened here. And by the way, if we will look at the time before 2014, before this year, we were brothers and sisters, although Ukraine was a separate state. But starting from 2014, when in Ukraine the Maidan started, everything was changed. And my friends, my close friends, did not come here to Russia to visit us. And here it is how it is. If the president of the Russian Federation, Vladimir Putin, who was supported by all people, everybody supported him. Yeah, of course, there are some people, some influencers in theaters, for example, actors who get some state money. They made some pathological pieces of art, so to say, but they are making this for state money, even if they are not supporting the Russian government. But the Russian government was providing there with money for their theaters, for their movies, for movie making in radio. For example, here in Moscow, in center. Could you imagine this? If the Second World War, the Great Patriotic War, was in New York, and what would be if the Abwehr radio station, like from Nazi Germany, would work in New York in 1941-42, in Paris or in London? But this was in Moscow until now. Now it is not the case. Now the world will be changing, and this is right so. The Western world is also stating there is nothing left from the past. We are facing the new civilization. But what will be this new civilization? What does Russia make right now? By the way, we are fighting not only for Lugansk, for Donetsk, where Russian people are living, who were waiting for 8 years. They were killed by Nazis for 8 years, and the blood was shed during 8 years. And we were waiting and waiting for what? We are now fighting not only for Lugansk city, for Donetsk city. We are fighting not only for Russia that ceased to be exist in 1 year if we would just look at this, what was planned by the collective West. We today now are making this operation for you, for the whole planet. By the way, the people who lived on the West, in America, for example, Casey, he could foresee this. What you could read what he was speaking about Russia. He was stating his hope about Russia, and he was saying that the planet will be saved from Russia. And the biggest thinkers from West were also stating about the support that will come from Russia, like Michel Nostradamus, for example. He was speaking also about Russia. And the aim, what is the goal, is of all of this is to save Russia, to save Ukraine, to exterminate Nazism, and therefore the Russian army is very carefully coming through Ukraine. We are only cleaning this country out of Nazism. And by the way, we are struggling to support, to help the planet. And I think the goal of Putin, of Russia, is only one, to show to the planet, which is in the state of extinction, which is in the state of abandoning all the Christian values, like all the rules that were provided by our ancestors. Do not kill, do not steal, do love your father and mother, and the others. By the way, it is all left behind with the Western same-sex connections, same-sex marriages. And by the way, what are you doing here? What is this all for? You wanted, as the collective West, us to live like this, but we can remember and we really support our traditions, and we are bringing in these traditions. We are showing that we can live with our traditions, not stating anything against Russia. I may say that there is the third world war running right now in the world. And you know, Russia is huge. Russia is self-sufficient. And by the way, I lived for the last 75 years. And I have seen many things. And there was unknown for me. Why are we bearing this? Because we see that this Western world in its agony, it is dying. It is lying. And it is stating one thing, signing the contracts, international contracts that are legally binding, and then it is breaching these contracts. And our goal, our aim is to show to the world the model of the new civilization, harmonic civilization, beautiful civilization, which lives guided by the traditions.
Okay, thank you. I have a bunch of questions about what you just said. So let me start. Okay, so the belief you hear in the West is that Ukraine and Belarus have been completely separate forever, and that it was just during the Soviet Union that they were combined with Russia. Is that true, or is that propaganda?
Не понял я вопроса, но я
I just don't get the question, really, but I will try to make a statement here. During the Soviet Union, we were living in harmony. Russians, Ukrainians, Belarusians, we were one folk, one nation. We could easily come to Kyiv, and they met us in the best way. They were greeting us, our beloved Ukrainian brothers, in Belarus, in Georgia also, in Tajikistan, in Uzbekistan. You could come to every state within the US, and there was harmony and really open, friendly relations. And then there was the fallout of the USSR, and I was speaking also about this. And later on, we've seen these small kingdoms that started to breach the trust of the Russia. We were supporting Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, for example, Georgia. We were opening universities in these countries, in the former USSR. We created the national culture, and this was done by the Russia, by the Soviet Russia. And by the way, in Russia, not even one folk, not even one nation was subject to genocide. There were some movement of a part of Chechen people, for example, when there were seen in a misconduct. But this was done by Stalin, for example. But not any one nation was dying off, and we were just supporting everybody, every nation with the love. And as Sergei Radonezhsky, one of the famous saints in Russia in the 14th century, he was stating, and by the way, I was making about this particular time the movie with Andrei Tarkovsky, and at that time Sergei Radonezhsky, the Russian saint, he was visited by the Dmitry Donskoy, the leader of Russian nation, and he came to this saint and he told him, let us fight against the Tatar-Mongol yoke. And he told, please do not do not do the atrocities. We need to combine all the powers. And when the time came, the Russian saint told to Dmitry Donskoy, go there and you will be victorious. And then Dmitry Donskoy went to Kulikovo field for the final battle. And by the way, now for Russia, for Putin, we see this state as Kulikovo field for Russia, for Ukraine, for Belarus, for the whole world, for you.
What did you mean by there's no real democracy?
А вы считаете, что она есть?
But do you think there is democracy?
Yes, I do.
Ну тогда давайте разберемся, моя дорогая.
So let us take a closer look at it. What is democracy? Democracy is the power of people. That means, do the people have the power? We don't. At us, no, we don't have the power that is coming from the people. That means we have to harmonize all, because the power is now represented in Putin, in our leader. But what is happening around Putin? There are so many oligarchs who practically were taking out the money and the resources out of the Russia, out of the people. We are voting not for oligarchs, but for Putin at the election. The people in Russia believe that Putin will bring in order. There is no democracy at your side, at our side. The democracy is just a show-off. It is just stating that the people have a right to vote, to choose between someone. But this is a fraud every time. Therefore, I think that there is no democracy in this sense. Понятно. And there cannot be. It cannot be the case. I will add it here. It is impossible, but what can be possible? The thing can be possible that will be shown by Russia. In Russia, there is the notion in Russian соборность, that means this collectivity, that means gathering. And we are gathered under a certain idea, high idea. We are gathered as the society. And there you have right to tell everything that you are thinking about and make right steps. And we will show it to the world. What is this? We can clean up our Russia because it's unfair that 500 oligarchs have everything and 100 million of people are at the verge of having no money at all. And we will push the order here and we will show the new model to the world.
Okay. Can you explain what you mean by the Nazis? You said the Nazis were fighting over the last 8 years in Ukraine. So are you saying there are Nazis in the Ukraine?
Yes, of course, they are. Haven't you seen it? Because there are the marches of the Nazis in the center of Kyiv. By the way, they are pretty much at the same time. They are showing the same times as the Hitler times, like swastikas. They are using swastikas. They are hailing each other. There is the severe nationalism there. I've seen this also 30 years ago. And we don't want to live under the elderly brother, under Moscow. Okay, you may live, as they say. But please, why are you putting down the Russian language? There is a great, by the way, Russian writer who was born in Ukraine, Nikolai Gogol. And Gogol was writing only in Russian. He loved Ukraine with all his heart, because you cannot love Ukraine. You have to love Ukraine when you see it once. Ukraine is gorgeous. But he was writing in Russian. And then when somebody asked him, why do you not use Ukrainian language? He told, but how I can use a dialect when there is a language of the great Pushkin? He was the admirer of Alexander Pushkin, and he was writing in Russian. And by the way, Taras Shevchenko, who is well renowned in Ukraine, the most important literary classics for Ukraine, he was using Russian language, and he loved Russia, for example.
So Ukraine said you couldn't use Russian language in Ukraine?
Да, он запрещен.
Yes, this is the case. Russian language is banned in Ukraine. It was banned, and this is a part of genocide of Russian people. This is a killing of all Russian. And by the way, when you are killing all Russian in Ukraine, you are killing yourself, because earlier Ukraine was named Kyiv, Russia, and this was the heart of Russian people, and they know about this.
What international contracts are the West breaking?
Кто ж тогда у нас правил? Правил тогда...
Okay, I will start by this. Who was the ruler at that time? It was Gorbachev time, and he made a contract with American president and with all European countries about the fact that the NATO will stay there where it was, that NATO will not come closer to Russia. And by the way, something was signed at that time. I think there was an agreement of it, but there was a breach and treason, and NATO came to our borders closer and closer, step by step. They were taking to NATO Latvia, Georgia, the former Soviet republics, also Poland, which was also a part of the Soviet influence in yesteryears. This was a part of Warsaw Treaty, Czech Republic, Slovakia. They all were under control, so to say, by the Soviet Union. And NATO took it all. NATO was feeling it all, and they came to the borders of Belarus, and they wanted, and there were their plans to make out of Ukraine the NATO base for the rockets to fly as soon as possible to Moscow. And this was prevented by Putin. If we could wait for 1 year, I think 1 day, and if the operation was started not on 24th but 25th, it would be already late, because on 25th there was the operation of Ukrainian army planned, and the idea was to extinguish in 3 hours Donetsk and Lugansk and come further. And Putin knew about these plans because we have our intelligence services, and Putin was ahead of this plan by 24 hours, and Ukrainian Nazis and their army were not waiting for this.
Okay, 2 questions. So what happened in Donetsk and Lugansk, or what's been going on in the last 8 years there?
I was in these republics, and I've seen really what is happening there, because our friends are working there in Lugansk, in Lugansk Ukrainian musical theater. I have my friends there, and I visited there. And they told me about every day they were bombed, their relatives were dying, they were killed, thousands of people died during these 8 years in Lugansk. And what for? Why were they killed? There was no Russian army, there were the citizens of Ukraine, and they were cut from the support from Kyiv. They lost everything, and Kyiv did not pay their pension, for example, retirement pays, and they tried to kill them because they did not want to be a part of Ukraine. They did not want to be under the Ukrainian Kyiv rule. And I've been in the villages, I've seen these children who are in under their houses, who are living under the soil. They lived in under the buildings during the last 8 years. And nobody in the whole world was speaking about this at all.
Okay. What's wrong with NATO?
С НАТО все не так. С НАТО.
It's all wrong with NATO.
Против кого?
Because ask yourself against whom they are pushing all the weapons, putting all the weapons and stating all the weapons. Earlier they were saying in NATO that they want to protect the world against the terrorists. And step by step they were coming to our borders. Against terrorists, they said. No, it was against us. They want Russia. They want the Russian territories because we are very rich. We are self-sufficient. No sanctions are bothering us. Yeah, of course, it will be not so easy, but Russia is aware of the uneasiness. We are still... I'm speaking not about you personally when I'm speaking you or West. I can say that because of these sanctions we will turn out to be better. We will support our economy, we will restore our culture and support our culture, and there will be a reborn for Russia. I'm pretty sure in it.
Okay, let me see. We've covered a lot. In the Western media, it says that Russia's been attacking Ukrainian civilians. Is that true?
Абсолютная ложь.
It's absolutely lie. We are supporting the civilians in Ukraine. We are giving food to those people. We are entering into the territory the tons of products because in the cities who are now more relaxed, like Melitopol, for example, we have seen the footages when the soldiers are giving food to our brothers, because these are our brothers. And if we would do as America does in Syria, in Libya, in Iraq, when they are tearing down by the bombardments, everything would be already at the verge of extinguishing. The people, the architecture, but we will not do this at any cost because we are Russian.
What role does the USA play in this war, if any?
USA is playing the major role in this war. They were burning the fire, the initial fire, in our brother, in Ukraine, in our elderly brother, by the way. They were putting gasoline in this burning fire to make it more and more out of it, because the Americans will not fight by themselves. If everything will happen with the participation of Americans, if there will be a threat from America, we will use our rockets, we will use our weapons. And therefore, Biden is stating, we will not interfere, we will not use the American army. But, of course, they are giving tons of weapons, of explosives to the Ukrainians, to the brothers who have to kill the brothers. And by the way, the America did it in the way that we are shedding blood of each other, the Slavic blood, the Russian blood in its sense. And this is the worst case. And this is the tragedy for Russian, for Ukrainians, and the Americans did it. But for this, I think they will answer on their soil. And I think many leaders do not believe in it, what I am saying. And I've been there. I know that there is the other world behind the verge of the dead, and they will face and they will have to answer it.
Do you see this ever getting to the point of using nuclear weapons?
About
this, there was a statement from our president about nuclear weapon. We have another military doctrine, and this is the other doctrine. America has the other doctrine than from Russia, that it is stated in the military doctrine of America that America could also use preemptive strikes. But we have another military doctrine. We are protecting our borders. And Putin told, if this will be the case, then the whole world will be at extinct. As Putin said, the ones who are initiating this, they will come to hell, go to hell, and we will choose the other way. if we will die, then we will die all, and the ones will come to hell, and the others will join the heaven.
So definitely don't attack Russia.
Ну так это понимает Байден.
Yes, I think Biden understands this. The whole Europe understands this. NATO understands this. And by the way, there is one moment that I wanted to tell you about. When these 19 countries of NATO were bombing Yugoslavia, I was there in Yugoslavia at that particular time. And I stood together with the people of Belgrade on the bridges, and I was speaking something on behalf of Russia to support our brothers. And there, then when I was in Belgrade, I've seen on the television, and by the way, it was seen by the whole world, as the general staff head of the Russian army here in interview in Moscow told then, well, yes, our missiles can come in 7 minutes to London, in 5 minutes to Berlin. And there was a panic. I was as a guest at my Belgrade friends, and they called from Berlin to them, and they told that the press in Berlin was afraid. 5 minutes. What about us? Why we? Why do we? What are we having to do with all this? But we will not start the war. Never. Russia will never start the war. Because it was only finalizing wars. And we will push the end to this war, and we will eliminate all the Nazis, also in your name.
Okay, so just to reiterate, Russia went into the Ukraine to fight Nazis, and that war has been going on for 8 years or for longer than 8 years?
For Russia, these are 7 days. This is the operation of cleaning out of the territory of our beloved Ukraine from the Nazis, and only 7 days. But the Nazis were killing their brothers in Donetsk, in Lugansk, for last 8 years. And Russia did not interfere with the military power. Russia was not in war with Ukraine during these 8 years, although the whole Western world is stating that Russia is fighting against Ukraine during these 8 years. But this is lies, only lies. And for lies, you will have to answer. All the journalists from all the world, I know, I understand you are getting the money, you need to work on to get your money, and you will lie further, you will, as a journalist, speak lies about Russia. But Russia is not a friend number one. Russia is the friend number one. If Russia says yes, it will be yes. If Russia says no, it will be no. And we told no.
How long do you think this current war is going to last?
Этот вопрос мы все задаем.
We all are asking this question. And you know our experienced professionals from military, and we have Group Alpha, and these are the super professionals where one person has a value of 100 persons, 100 specialists. I think Group Alpha would make this in 3 days. They could clean up all in 3 to 5 days. But Russia is using the humane way. Therefore, it will take longer. Perhaps 1 more week. And then there will be another process of restoration of the spirit of Ukrainian people, of unity of Ukrainian people, and it will make the pavement for them to go back to their roots. It's not the West, it's not NATO. Ukraine is of no value for NATO. Americans, regular Americans, do not know where is Ukraine. They do not need it. They need only blood there in Ukraine for us to kill each other. And we will try to make as less blood as possible. We will try to do this. And then there will be a very long process of healing, process of redemption, of understanding. Why are we here? Why did we believe to these Nazis, to these quasi-historians that said that the first guy who was of Ukrainian descent was Adam, created by the God, and this is the separate folk, separate nation, separate from Russia. And this is uneasy. It will take a long time. We have evidenced this, how the Russophobia people were created in Ukraine. And this is the hate.
What are your views on Zelensky?
If you ask me what I am thinking about Zelensky, I can say that I am thinking he wants to be my colleague. He is not an actor. I can speak about this as a professional actor who is dealing with the 62 years from the childhood of Ivan, the movie by Andrei Tarkovsky. He is a comedian. Let us speak about the artist. My profession has put me in this position that if somebody tells me that I am an artist, I would not agree with this really. Because artist is somebody who is playing a role, and that means that they are subject to the will of some other people. And he is just a comedian, and he's a foul comedian. And being a foul comedian, he wanted to play a role of the president. But because of lack of understanding, he did not understand what he was doing, and he was under guidance, and everybody knows this. America was guiding these foul comics. He was listening to them. They told him, let's do the war. And we don't want the war, we want peace. And therefore, his destiny is not a good one. He will be put on the altar, and he will be the one who will be used and then fall apart. And or perhaps he will come somewhere where he has his money, billions of dollars for this selling of Russia and for this possibility to be a submissive person under the feet of the USA. And then he is saying, why Europe is not helping us? We are a huge country, we are bigger than Europe, but when we will be under the Russia, you will lose us. Give us the money. So he was lending and lending, he was taking all the money, but who will pay the bills? And the bills are here.
What happens after Russia gets rid of the Nazis in the Ukraine? Are they going to stay there, or are the Russians going back to Russia?
Russians, they are not, they are already on Ukrainian lands. They used to live there through these years under oppression, having fears, and now they can really have a deep breath in and see Ukraine. And they will not show you the chronicle footages of the people who are happy that there are no more aggressive nationalists in their neighborhood. They will live an easy life, but unfortunately now we see that there are young children, young adults who are subject to the ideology. Then we will have to do something. And imagine it like this. If you ask somebody who is wise that there is so much evil in the world, knowledgeable person would say that we will not have to fight against this. Up there, over the line of evil, you will need to put another line, a line of harmony, of love, of respect, and of support. And this will be the line that will be put by the Russia. And by the way, the help will be rendered. Russia will have to render the help to restore everything that was torn apart, that was deconstructed during the last 30 years by those who were governing Ukraine. And this process will take a long time. But what shall be done? Russia got used to do it, to help, to restore. By the way, you could see how the Crimea and Sevastopol are restored. What are the investments that are coming there? There are new roads there, new bridges. How the people are living this? I could invite you to Sevastopol. You could see the people who are having everyday feast. They are dancing there. They are living well there. And I am an often guest there. And here is what is Russia. The Russia brings in peace and harmony.
Okay. I don't think I have any more questions. Is there anything else you want to say before we stop the podcast?
Ну, что сказать? Мы очень много прямо, откровенно говорили.
What to say? We've been talking in a very open mode. I think somebody will not believe in the word that I am stating because they are listening to the other sources. But even here in Russia, I am every time speaking the truth. And by the way, this is a problem for the authorities, for example, in Russia, because I say to some of them that you should not be a governing person here. You don't understand what you are doing. But perhaps when you listen to me, you will just think about what I was stating, and you will want to get to know the truth. And as the great Russian poet Lermontov told, there is the sense of truth within the human's heart. And this sense of truth deep in your heart, it will show itself in the people who are listening to us right now.
Okay, I have one more question and then we'll end. Would you say that the average Russian citizen agrees with what you're saying?
Вы знаете, со мною согласны.
You know, I think 98% of Russians would agree with what I am stating. There is the so-called fifth column, the last 2%. There will be, and they were. These are the people who are not admiring their nation, who are thinking that somewhere else is better. I think there is no country that is better than Russia. We have everything. We have seas, lakes, we have Baikal Sea, we have deserts even, we have everything, we have oil, we have gas, natural gas, we are self-sufficient. And that we see the Iron Curtain right now, it is done by them, not by us. I personally would greet this. I'm happy because of this. Russia will be stronger. Russia will show to the world new civilization model of salvation of human race. And I want to thank you. You are gorgeous, and I am glad to see you.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much, Nikolai, for taking out the time and coming on the podcast. That was very interesting.
Thank you. And God help us.
Definitely, God help us.
Please do not forget about the God.